Do you know your attachment style but still find yourself reacting in ways that you regret? It's frustrating, isn't it? What if I told you that those reactions were driven by a series of unconscious steps rooted in that attachment style? In this video, I'm going to reveal a unique formula I created that uncovers these hidden steps and also show you how to transform those reactions so that you can feel and look more confident. Stick around, because understanding this formula could be the key to breaking free from those unhealthy patterns for good. Quickly though, why should you listen to me over all those other attachment style pages on YouTube? I'm Aaron, and I found out about my attachment style at 15. For 8 years, I obsessed over trying to overcome it. I learned and tried a ton of different things, even pursued a psychology degree, eventually found a ton of answers, became way more secure, and now I've coached hundreds of others in doing the same in way less time. So I've learned a lot, but I've also actually been through it. I'm not going to stand here and just speak as if I'm reading from a book like most of the others do. I'm going to share my stories, explain things more simply, give you actual answers and steps, and most importantly, be there with you along this journey. So, let's get into it. Oh, heads up, this is the only part of the video that was actually scripted. From now on, we're going full raw education mode. So before we get into the formula, we have to grab a trigger. And what I mean by a trigger is a moment in our relationships, whether that be with a partner or with friends or family or at work, where the specific situation brings up a lot of discomfort for us and then pushes us into actually reacting in that way that we don't like. So for example, we can use not getting a text back. That's a pretty common one within anxious and disorganized attachment. What you will normally see or be aware of in your situations is you'll get that situation come up. So for example, not get a text back. You will then react in a way that you don't like. And then when you react in that way that you don't like, which usually is very unhealthy, you then feel shame or guilt around it. And that leaves you thinking about yourself in a very unhealthy or bad way. Why did I do this? I don't understand where this is coming from. What's wrong with me? Am I just broken? That is the usual cycle that you will see yourself in and actually be aware of. That's the part that's actually conscious. Now, there are also actually unconscious steps that are really important to understand so that you can really get an idea of why these things are happening, why you're reacting in these ways, and where it all comes from. Once you see these unconscious steps too, you'll then start to be able to replace them with more healthier coping mechanisms and ways of dealing with it that will change this entire cycle or pattern. So now that we can see where we're at right now, let's go into the depth of it. Let's see what's actually going on underneath. So we'll use that same example I said before, the no text back. So that's the situation itself. Now, a few other things could be within anxious attachment, it could be not getting a text back, your partner going out with other friends, them looking at other people, anything like that, any moment that really brings up that anxiety, that fear, that worry. With disorganized, it's usually very similar things that trigger them. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go to the other end of the spectrum, which is avoidant attachment. Now, avoidant attachment, the situation could look like something like being asked to express their feelings, their partner coming across very clingy or needy, needing their support, needing their help. Now, and then disorganized, as you should already know, is basically just a combination of the two. So different things within each end of the spectrum will both affect a disorganized attachment person. And by the way, that's what I dealt with, disorganized attachment. So both of them. Now, the situation itself, there's not much you can do about it, right? You can't control necessarily what happens around you. And you don't want to control the things that happen around you. You don't want to avoid certain situations because it triggers you. The more healthy thing to do is to understand what's happening and then have healthier ways of dealing with it. That's a very big part of secure attachment. So the situation is the situation. What I suggest you do is think of times where you feel very uncomfortable, anxious, worried, and then it pushes you to that point where you feel like you have to react. That is a trigger situation. Now we're going into the unconscious. Now what happens is once this situation occurs, what the first thing that will happen is we get a negative thought. Now this is where a lot of people get stuck or confused, because the negative thought, for example, if you don't get a text back, might be, they don't want to text me back, or they're not texting me back because they're with someone else, right? It's that first like really bad, uncomfortable, difficult, scary, negative thought that comes up in you. Now people get stuck here because their mind logically can try and argue against it. It'll be like, no, that's not true. They must really love you. why would they be out cheating on you? Why would they not text you? They're clearly showing that they like you. And they almost like invalidate and ignore and push away that negative thought. The problem is, though, and you'll find this within yourself, even though you've pushed away that thought, even though you've like logically argued against it, you still feel the next thing, which is the difficult feelings. It's almost as though that negative thought doesn't really go away. It just sits in the back of your mind and it starts like ruminating. It starts like gathering this like power. And what happens then is it brings up all these difficult feelings. And that's when the anxiety starts kicking in. That's when the fear, the worry, the doubt, all of those really uncomfortable feelings that you're going to feel in your stomach, in your chest, potentially in your throat, and then spreading out throughout your body, that's where that stuff is going to occur. Now, what's important to understand is these two situations right here, these two steps, they happen unconsciously. And what I mean by that is you're not really aware of them in that moment. You might start to feel, ooh, like something's not right, like I feel uncomfortable, but you're not sitting there and being like, oh, this is definitely anxiety, this is what I'm feeling, and it's because of this negative thought that I had, and the negative thought was X, Y, and Z. That's not happening. These two things can happen in the space of seconds. And that's why a lot of the time, and why I started in this way, was that we often go straight from situation, straight to reaction, almost like that. And once we've gone straight to reaction, without understanding that these two things are happening internally, that's when we start to feel bad about ourselves. So, once we then have the negative thought and difficult feelings happening in combination, that's when things get really intense. That's when we start to go into this almost panic mode, where things feel like there's just something really terrible going on. And what happens when that occurs is we get sent into what is known as the fight or flight mode. Now, the fight or flight mode is almost like when we're reacting on instinct. We're not in control anymore. We're not in the pilot seat. It's those moments where, for example, if you have disorganized attachment, it's when you see red. It's like where everything just goes straight to anger. It's in anxious attachment when you everything just feels like an absolute end of world situation where you feel like you're falling apart almost. Avoidant attachment is where you kind of really block up, close up, and just want to detach from everything, like everybody get away from me, etc., etc. Once we get sent into that fight or flight mode, that's when we actually react. Now, this is an unhealthy reaction. And let me actually just write that there just to make sure. That is an unhealthy reaction. And the reason it's unhealthy is because for anxious attachment, for example, because of these difficult feelings and negative thoughts, will very often almost be coerced, forced, manipulated into reacting in a way that we don't want to, or what's not really true to us. For example, anxious attachment comes across as very clingy or needy, almost as if they're so fragile that they just need someone else to pick them up and put them back together. Disorganized attachment will very often go into like a very aggressive, accusatory, or like cold space. So they'll start to like get angry at their partner. They will accuse them of things even if there's no evidence. They will shut down and go cold and not want them to touch them. Avoidant attachment will be like the disconnecting, will be the distancing, the not like moving away from everybody. So once we've been almost pushed, coerced, manipulated into the reaction, that's when we then move into the shame or guilt phase, which is we feel bad about ourselves because we don't have this full picture as we're going in. And there's actually a lot more to this unconscious picture, which I'll go into in other videos. Because we're reacting in this way and we don't understand where it's happening, why it's happening, or where it comes from, we then feel bad about ourselves. As I said, it's the, why am I acting so clingy or needy? I know I'm not that way. I'm actually like a confident person. Why am I like accusing my partner? Why am I hurting them? I know I'm not that kind of person, or I don't want to be that kind of person. Avoidance, a little bit less aware of it, but some part of them also does say, I want to be close with this person. Why do I feel so uncomfortable and need to move away? You then feel bad about yourself because you are the one who acted in that way, right? So we look at ourselves and we look at how we acted and we think to ourselves, what's wrong with me? Why am I doing these things? I don't understand why it's happening or where it comes from. There must be something just wrong with me. Maybe I'm just broken. Maybe I'm just fundamentally flawed. But we're missing these pieces and more. So there's one more important thing I want to go into before we talk about the actual solutions to this. Now, the definition of insecurity, and just by the way, attachment styles are a type of relational insecurity. which means you're dealing with insecurities. So the attachment style itself comes from a certain place, but then what happens afterwards is you're dealing with a bunch of beliefs, fears, worries, insecurities, etc. Now, the definition of insecurity is to be anxious or uncertain about yourself. Now, I want to show you this little cycle here quickly, because what happens is we getting sent down this formula, as I said, but we don't actually understand the full picture. Until now, as I said, you're looking at the conscious part, you're only seeing this. When you can start to understand the unconscious steps too, you'll start to see and understand what is actually going on with you. But because you don't have this full picture, we're going straight from situation into reaction into feeling bad about ourselves. And if you look at that in terms of a cycle, we go situation into an unhealthy reaction, we then feel bad about ourselves, and what does that do? It reinforces uncertainty about who we are, how we're showing up. And that is the definition of insecurity. So what we're actually doing by not understanding this whole picture and just going straight from situation to unhealthy reaction to shame and guilt every time is we are reinforcing insecurity within ourselves, uncertainty about ourselves. Now that you understand that, I want to go into the next stage, which is, okay, what do we actually do about this then? And if I just turn over here, this is going to be the game plan, what we really want to do. And these are fundamental skills within overcoming your attachment style. So if you remember from before, where we end up is in that space of fight or flight, where our nervous system, our body is actually like physically reacting and sending us into this reactionary, instinctive space. So the very first thing that we should do, once we've gone from situation, and now you can kind of think about it, as I said, going backwards now, the situation is now that we're in the space where we're triggered, right? We're in fight or flight. So what we want to do is we want to work backwards. We want to go from situation to the first thing that you're doing is you want to attack, or not attack, but calm down that nervous system. And what you're going to do with that is self-regulation techniques, deep breathing, visualization, grounding, etc. All of these things within self-regulation, there are different tools and techniques you can use. And all of that I go into depth into in my community and my one-on-one coaching. So we're regulating our nervous system. That means we are coming out of that fight or flight response and we're getting to a more calm and regulated space where we're able to think things through more logically, handle situations more efficiently, and not react in those unhealthy ways necessarily. What we want to do after that is now we're sitting in a more calm space, but we still have these difficult feelings inside of us that aren't really making sense to us. So the next important thing to learn and understand is self-reassurance. Now, there's a whole topic on this called inner child work, which is really important. And one of the methods through that is something called psychophonetics, which is a bit of like a visualization. You're almost reparenting yourself. You're going inside. You're seeing, why am I feeling this way? Why am I thinking this way? And then almost reassuring, being there for yourself. And I'm not going to go into depth too much into this, but I just want to give you like a brief overview so that you can almost heal or be there for that inner child that is freaking out in that moment. Once we've regulated, once we've like understood, sorted out, figured out these feelings that are going on inside, where they're actually coming from, we then want to move into what I call positive mindset. Now there's two parts to positive mindset. And you can kind of think of these two parts as one part is the practice before the actual match, and the other part is doing it in the actual situation, which is the match. So outside of the match, the practice would be things like meditation, grounding, restructuring of neural pathways, all that type of thing. Inside the actual match would be trying to cognitively understand where this stuff is coming from and see if you can shift or see beliefs that are limiting your understanding and progress so that you can then change them, try something different, see that it's not this situation you're reacting to and it's actually something from before. All of these things I'll go into more depth in the future. That would be the next important point. So like once you're in this space of calm, you can logically and rationally view the situation and what's going on in a much different perspective and light. Once you've gotten to this space, this is where the next important thing will come into, which is a healthy response. So you can tell the biggest difference there is reaction, unhealthy reaction. I'm reacting based off of these feelings and negative thoughts that might not be true, versus a healthy response. I am responding to the situation after dealing with the things that are difficult and potentially may not be true. The healthy response can come in the form of, for anxious attachment, would be like setting boundaries, asking for reassurance healthily, so you don't come across as like needy or clingy. There are many more, but I'll go into depth in them later as well. For disorganized attachment, will also be like a combination. So either communication, boundary setting, asking for reassurance healthily, or something that's more on the avoidance side in general, and within disorganized attachment would be expressing vulnerability, allowing love and connection and closeness. Once you are responding healthily, you will then feel better about yourself and about the situation and how you handled it, because you will start getting different responses. So, and different outcomes, more successful, more healthy, more beneficial outcomes. So whereas before, when you remember, you're going into that cycle of, well, I feel really worried about not getting a text back. It sends me into the fight or flight mode because of this negative thought that I have. Once I react in a very clingy or needy way, then my partner starts to be like, oh, this is clingy and needy. This is not the vibe. I don't really like this. And then you start feeling bad about yourself, not only because of the reaction that you get, but because of how you feel about yourself and how you handled it, because you don't like it. Whereas here, we go from situation to a healthy response because we're handling these unconscious steps too. We then feel better about ourselves because our partner doesn't feel too overwhelmed, for example, or they get the closest that they want, depending if you're dealing with anxious or avoidant. And the situation is handled more healthily and you get a better response and a better outcome. Therefore, you feel good about yourself and how you handled it. Now, if you remember, the definition of insecurity being uncertainty about yourself. If you are the one putting in actionable steps to then get a better response and feel better about yourself, then you will feel, as I said, better about yourself, more confident in how you show up and how you handle these situations. And what that will do is it will build confidence, make you feel better, and leave you repeating a healthier cycle and actually hitting like one of the core parts of insecurity, which is a huge blow to the attachment style that you have. So now that you understand this formula and you can see what's actually going on underneath, it is really important that you learn, for example, the different skills within self-regulation, self-reassurance, building a positive mindset, and then healthy responses. Because within, for example, boundary setting, healthy communication, vulnerability, those are all different skills too that you need to deep dive into. So the point of this video, and what I really hope that you gain from this, is that it's not just situation, reaction, and then feeling bad about yourself. What is actually happening are these unconscious steps that you can work on to leave yourself and lead yourself into a better response, which will leave you feeling better about yourself. Now, if you want to go into depth about any of these things and literally work straight with me to help you learn certain skills and understandings, and alongside some other really awesome people, I have a community that I'll link in the description below, and I also do one-on-one coaching, which I'll also link below. And if you're dealing specifically with anxious attachment, I'll also link a free ebook that will go into depth about this and some other really important parts. So in the next video, which if I get it done by the time this video comes out, unlikely, then it'll pop up around here. In the next video, I'll be talking about and going into depth of the negative thought, because this negative thought is coming up for a reason, and it's very hard to argue against, and it's very hard to properly let go of because of a very important reason, which is that we have a core belief, and that core belief is causing this. And we'll go into that in the next video. Keep growing.